In this lecture, we are going to look at the pivot table fields list and understand it in depth, which will help you create a pivot table from scratch. Understand that pivot table fields list is the engine behind a pivot table. Once you understand the pivot table fields list, you have understood 50% of pivot tables right there. So let's get started and have a look at what we have in the pivot table fields list. The first thing that we have is the search bar along with a list of items in this scroll bar. As you can see, we have a bunch of items and we start off with title. We have release date, color black and white, genre, and so on. So what exactly are these items? These are nothing but the different columns that you have in your source data. So if you look at these fields, we have title, release date, color black and white. If I go back to my source data, you can see we have title, release date, color black and white, genre, and so on. So these items are nothing but the entire columns of our source data. It's very important to understand that these are not just the header names, but are representing the entire column of data. So when I have title here, it means the entire title column. If I have release date here, it means the entire release date column. If I have color black and white here, it means the entire color black and white column, which is this. So that's what we have here. We have each and every column listed here, starting from title till the last column that we have in our source data, which is the budget. We can simply click, hold, and drag an item from here into any of these four boxes to create a pivot table or even modify a pivot table once we have it created. But the question is, what do I put and where do I put it? Here we have four boxes and it's very important to put the right item in the right box. And that's exactly what we are going to discuss now. Let's start off with the rows box and understand what it does. The rows box, if I bring any field or any item into it, you can call these items or even fields. You can simply click and drag a field from here and bring it into rows. Whatever field I bring it into the rows box will be displayed in different rows of my pivot table. And only the distinct values will be visible to me. I would not be having any duplicates. For example, if I simply bring color black and white to my rows, notice how now my different rows will be having the different items in color / black and white column, which in this case is black and white and color. Now notice how I have multiple instances of black and white and color in the column here. But I only see two values here. Why is that the case? The reason for that is pivot tables will never show you duplicates of an item. It will only show you the distinct values, the unique values. So here you have black and white and you have color. Only the values which are unique will be displayed here. So even if you have, let's say, 1000 movies in the black and white type, you will still not have 1000 black and white items being displayed in the pivot table. You will only have one here. For color, even if you have 2000 movies, you will have only one color in the pivot table. If you want to remove something from the pivot table, you can simply go to the drop down here, click on it and select the option of remove field. Or my personal method, or I would say my favorite method, would be to simply click, hold and drag it back to the box here. And it will go away. Let's take a look at another example. So let's say I want to now look at my different genre. So I'll click, hold and drag it to my rows. And as you can see, different genres are now in different rows. We have action, adventure, animation and so on. Again, we do not have any duplicates of it. So even if I have, let's say, 100 movies in my source data, which is of the action genre, I will only see one action written here. So very straightforward, you have unique items in different rows of your pivot table if you bring a field inside your rows box. The opposite of it would be the columns box. If you bring anything inside the columns box, it will start being displayed in different columns. For example, If I want to have a look at my genre in different columns, I can simply click, hold and drag it to columns and shift it from rows to columns. Now we have different genres, again unique items in different columns. So we have action, adventure, animation and so on. You can even have a combination of rows and columns. So if I bring in my color black and white to my rows, you can see we have a combination. Now we have a two-way table. So we have black and white for and color to our left hand side, that is in different rows, and we have the genre in different columns. This is something that you can do as well. So remember, you have unique items displayed in rows whenever you bring a field into rows, and unique items in columns whenever you bring something into columns. Very simple way to remove something from your pivot table is to click and drag it back to this list of fields that you have at the top. If you have a lot of fields and you want to search amongst it, you can simply go to the search bar. Let's say I want to search for budget. I can simply type in BUD and it will show me budget here. So that's something that you can use in case you have a lot of columns and don't want to go through this list by using the scroll bar here. Remember, only date and I would say text columns would be going into rows and columns. Do not put in values columns into rows and columns. What do I mean by that? Let's understand. When it comes to color / black and white, what kind of data does it have? The data type here is text. It contains some kind of text, right? Similarly with genre, you have some kind of text. This is completely fine. You can bring fields which are having text as data into rows and columns. But what about something like, let's say, revenue or budget or even duration and total reviews? All these fields will be having numerical values, and numerical values do not belong to rows and columns. It actually belongs to the next box that we have here, which is the values box. So if you want to have a numerical field inside your pivot table, it most certainly always goes into the values box. Let's take an example. I'll remove color black and white from my rows by bringing it back to the list and shift my genre to rows. So now we have different rows of data having different genres. And let's say I want to see the total revenue for each genre. What do? I know that I want to see the total revenue, which is this particular field. So I will have to bring this into my pivot table. But where do I bring it? Do I bring it into my rows and columns? Not really. It's reserved for only date columns, or I would say date fields and text based fields. Because this is a numerical field, you will have to bring it into the values box. As the name tells you, here you only have values being inserted. So I'll bring in my revenue into values. And now the values of total gross revenue, that is the sum of gross revenue, will start being displayed for different genres. That is, whatever is there in your rows. So here I have genre. I will have gross revenue for action, the total gross revenue for adventure, and so on. If I had something else, for example, if I didn't have genre, I'll remove this. And I didn't have anything here, I would find the total gross revenue of my entire source data, which in this case is this value, right? You can convert this into a number as well to remove the E plus 11, but I'll do that later. For now, let's have a look at something else. For example, if I had the language in my rows, I simply brought in my language, you could see the total gross revenue according to language. So whatever you bring it into rows, the values will start being displayed for them. So you can bring in language and see the total revenue for language on the click of a button. You can remove this and let's bring in country. And you can see the total gross revenue per country, or even rating, or even the color black and white, whatever you want to see. So the values will be put in the values box here. Any numerical field will go into the values box here. And if you want to see it according to some particular field, such as country or language or genre, that will go into rows. You can also bring that into columns in case you want to see it horizontally. So I can simply move my country from rows to columns, and now we have the data in different columns. Very similar, it's just vertical and horizontal difference. again, you can use a combination of two things. So for example, if I have country here, I can bring color black and white into my rows. And now I have two values for each country. One for black and white movies for that country and one for color movies of that country. So we have black and white Australia total revenue. Then we have color Australia total revenue. It's as easy as this to calculate something. As you can see, something like this would take us a lot of time when it comes to formulas. But when it comes to a pivot table, is as simple as bringing something into rows, columns, and values. Summarizing it till this point, rows is something which is having a text or a date based field, never a number based field. Similarly with columns. But when it comes to values, you will have any numerical field brought into values. So let's modify our pivot table a bit. I'll remove color black and white, remove country as well, and bring in my genre again to my rows. Now we have different genres here and the total revenue here. If you want to see, let's say, the total budget of different genres, you can do that as well by going down. Here you have the budget. Click and bring it into values. Alright. So you can have multiple items into different boxes as well. There is no limitation of only having one field per box. You can simply click and drag it to values. And now you have gross revenue and you have gross revenue too. Let's remove this and let's bring in the budget for now. There we go. Now we have the gross revenue, the total gross revenue, and we have the total budget for different genres as well. If you want to bring budget ahead of gross revenue, you can simply click, hold, and try to bring it at the top like this. There we go. Now we have budget at the top and we have gross revenue after it. This is something that you can do as well. And it's also similar to other boxes. So for example, here you have rows as genre. If you want to see a further bifurcation, let's say for color. So you want to see genre again broken down into two different colors, either color or black and white. You can simply go to color black and white, click and hold and bring it back to rows below the genre. And now you have a breakdown of your genre as well. So you have action, total budget, total revenue, but at the same time, you have black and white action, color action, and the values for that as well to have a look at. There is no limit as to the number of fields that you can bring in any of these four boxes. You can bring any number of fields and the pivot table will still work. And that's the beauty about pivot tables. You can make it as complex as possible. You can make it as simple as possible. That's completely up to your requirement. The final box that we are left with is the filters box. So for that, I'll remove the color for now and also remove the budget for now. Let's say I only want to look at the total gross revenue in my data for black and white movies. How do I filter out my data? Right now, it shows me the total revenue of all the movies, including color movies and black and white movies. I only want to see the total revenue for black and white movies. How do I do that? In order to filter my pivot table by something, which in this case is the color black and white item, I need to bring it into the filters box. So if I want to filter my pivot table based on something which is belonging to color/black and white, I will have to click and drag it to my filters box. Once I do that, I will have a filter at the top. As you can see, here we have color/black and white and we have this button called all. Simply go to the drop down here and you will see all the unique items that are there in color/black and white. This is very similar to what we have looked at earlier for filtering. So you can simply have black and white here or even color here. I want to have a look at black and white movies only. So I'll select this and click on OK. If you wanted to have more items selected, you could simply put a tick mark on select multiple items and then go ahead and select multiple items. In this case, I don't want that. So I'll simply select this and click on OK. As you can see, my table has now contracted. It has shrunken down to only a few values, right? That's because we are now having the data only for black and white movies. If I go ahead and click on all and click on OK, notice how my table has now expanded because now we are having more data to have a look at. So this is basically filtering our pivot table at the source. Wherever we select, let's say black and white and click on OK, it will simply disallow anything except black and white to even be calculated for our pivot table. It acts as a filter for our pivot table. So our source data is filtered according to this criteria, and only then the pivot table has the access to it. It has the access to the filtered source data. Now, if you are wondering, we have a drop down here as well, clicking on which expands to different filtering options, something that we have had a look at earlier in the first module. So what is the difference between this button and this separate filters box? That's a really good question. The difference here is when it comes to this drop down, it can only filter the data according to what it has in that column. So if I go here, I could individually select or deselect different genres. But if I want to have a filter based on something which is not a part of my pivot table, I will have to bring it into the filters box. For example, here we wanted to filter our data to see only black and white. It's not a part of my pivot table in any way. So I cannot use the drop down to filter my data. I need to specifically add it to my filters box in order to have that filter applied. Once you apply this, you can also add multiple more filters. For example, I could go on and bring in rating and simply select the rating to only approved and click on OK. And now we have very less data because we are having two filters being applied at the same time. So this is how the filters box works. In case you want to filter your data or your pivot table, you can use the filters box to do so. To recap on what we have learned so far in this lesson, we have looked at the fields list. The fields list contains 5 items. We have the fields list here, where we have different columns listed or different fields listed, one item being the entire column. Then we have looked at the rows box that is at the bottom. This rows box, whatever you bring into it, will be displayed in different rows and only will be having unique items. So there will be no duplicates of it. We have looked at the columns, which is also similar to rows, but the items will be displayed in different columns. Then we have looked at values, where we bring in any number-based fields. So all the numerical values are almost always included in the values field. Alright. And finally, we have looked at the filters box, where if I want to filter my entire pivot table by, I can simply bring in that field into the filters box and filter that using that particular item or that particular criteria. This is how the field list works, and we will be using the field list to create different pivot tables throughout the module. So that's it for this lecture, and I'll see you in the next one.